Howdy, folks. Happy Thursday. I have to say, it's really nuts out there, not because of the weather, but because everybody seems to be now scrambling around to get their Christmas lists done. It's a Thursday morning and afternoon, and traffic was unbelievable, and people were running around crazily, Russ. So,
I was on the PA Turnpike, like it was just another day. So let's talk about, I guess, Bruce Springsteen, who sold his catalog for $500 million. It's what I found interesting about it was Howard Stern just had Neil Young on for like this massive interview. And I'm not a huge Neil Young fan, but I respect the guy and I like some of his songs. Mm-hmm. And he recently sold his catalog to a friend and he still has full control over it, like the final say so. So he basically sold it to a guy who can make money off of it, make more money, but he still has control over it. And it didn't say that for Springsteen. Actually, the headline for the Times was completely stupid because it was like he sold the catalog and Born to Run. Like, really, is that the song you're worried about being sold?
It's New Jersey's theme song, Russ.
I know, but it's like of all the songs he has, and it's a good song, don't get me wrong. There's so many others you maybe would worry about before Born to Run. But the interesting thing was, though, like Mike had mentioned to me, Paul McCartney, when he bought his catalog back from Michael Jackson after giving him what he thought was good advice to Michael Jackson, and Michael Jackson bought the Beatles catalog, didn't like that. He hasn't given up his yet either. And both Young and Springsteen are old. Young and McCartney are much older than Springsteen, and so it made me think that Springsteen's just cashing out. I thought he was cashing out on Broadway because if you really wanted your true fans to see you, you wouldn't be charging $1,000 for a ticket for secondary market for 100 seats a night, right? And Mike had an interesting take on it. He'll say it in a minute, but it just seems like he's cashing out now, and I'm a little puzzled by it.
I don't know. I get very weirded out when music acts they sell their catalog off. Everything about it seems very strange. It's like you're giving up control of your songs and your music, and it's just like, wow, I don't know about that. Like you mentioned Born to Run being separate. I was like, I can't wait to hear it in every commercial known to man from here on out. Like that's because it's completely what's going to happen.
I'll give you one thing, and then Mike can go. I remember hearing an interview once with Jackson Browne, and early on when they were hitting up people and bands, and remember like Genesis, Tonight was like Michelob.
Yeah.
They hit up Jackson Browne, and they wanted to do the Pretender for their Chicken Tenders campaign. And he was just like, that was probably the face he had, Joe. Like, no effing way. But you're right. Now that's what's going to happen.
Well, also, what's McDonald's thinking having Jackson Browne do Jackson Browne music for? Oh, Burger King. Well, okay. What's Burger King thinking? It's still the same question. Like Jackson Browne doesn't strike me as.
I guess Pretender, Chicken Tender, they sound close enough.
Yeah, Burger King has got to think their things through because they have a plastic king on their commercial, this inanimate object. I mean, plus their hamburgers suck.
He's very animated.
Oh, really?
The plastic king is very, very animated.
My issue, Kevin, what we're talking about here is Bruce Springsteen sold his catalog, I guess his copyright for all of his songs for $500 million to Sony. And my first comment, of course, since I'm not a big Springsteen fan, is that Springsteen robbed him. Other artists like David Crosby did the same thing a few months back. He didn't get anywhere close to what Springsteen got, but he was like, I have a family. I want to pay off my the house so my wife has something. He was not hurting financially, but he had things that he needed to pay off. And somebody in the chat just said Dylan did the same thing. Stevie Nicks did the same thing. I don't know if Fleetwood Mac as a band did it, but
I would say Dylan and Stevie Nicks.
Jackson's stuff was sold. His estate sold his stuff. The Beatles.
Oh yeah, I mean the estate, sure.
Yeah. We're seeing it in sport. We're seeing it in sports too. Everybody's selling their memorabilia. A lot of top baseball.
Yeah, like Bill Russell is. He's 80 something now. Yeah. Like this is kind of early for Springsteen, I felt, and again, like the chat room saying some of these other acts do need the money. I mean, I don't think Springsteen actually needs the money, and that's why it was a little surprising too.
Well, there's some breaking news here that will fill into the first subject we'll talk about, which I'm sure everybody is sick of talking about, which is COVID and the leagues. But we'll do the intro to the show here, and then go with this. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Thursday, December 16th, 2021.
I'm Russ Cohen from Sportsology.
Kevin Allen from Hockey Buzz.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the Hockey Buzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. And we are pleased to be joined by reporter Joe Yerdon, who covers the Sabres and the NHL. Joe, give us where people can find your fine writing and your podcast.
Yeah, we've got I've got a new site called Noted Hockey on Substack. You can check that out there. I got to get back into writing a little bit more here, but I do have a new podcast as well, which is yet to be named, but it's myself and Lance Lasowski from the Buffalo News.
So how do you identify it?
Buffalo Hockey Podcast TBD.
Okay.
So yeah.
It's like the Washington Football Club of podcasts.
You could name it after the old department store in the Buffalo area, Two Guys.
Okay.
But I really like that. I like that Washington name. You know I do. I think that's actually cool.
Yeah, it's okay. I have no problem. It's extremely unoffensive as opposed to the previous name. So
it's probably going to change. I could live with it either way. Like, it doesn't matter to me.
I will say this: the Washington football team is a source of angst for me at the moment because there is a podcast that has controlled all search terms on Google that I thought of, and I was like, "This is perfect." And Lance agreed that I looked it up, and it's already a Washington podcast. We're like, all right, back to stage one. Yeah.
So, just breaking. The NFL has changed their COVID protocol, and we saw this coming. It is possible for a vaccinated player who is asymptomatic to return to team activities by testing out in as little as 1 day. So basically, they're saying it's okay if you have COVID. If you're asymptomatic, you can return to play. That's the interpretation here.
That's a dangerous slope.
We thought, because there was a lot of people who were saying regarding the NFL, it's like they wanted them to stop testing asymptomatic players, because if they're asymptomatic, there's no negative there in terms. They can transmit it.
They can transmit it to the rest of the team.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That's the negative.
Now,
it's a big negative.
Yeah, I agree, Joe.
It's a really big negative.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Joe, let's start with you here. We saw the explosion of positives a couple days ago on Tuesday. 23 players in the span of 36 hours, a lot on the Calgary Flames. I saw a report from Wes Gilbertson, who covers the Flames, that they have confirmed that the Omicron variant was part of that group. I think it's up to 17 or 18.
18. It's up.
Yeah, Dylan Dubé and Shillington were added to the group that was already in protocol. A number of other teams we've seen, situations where other players are positive, Bergeron and Marchand. Just give me your overall read on the situation right now, because I think there's a lot of panic going on right now.
I agree. I think there is a lot of panic. There's a lot of worry because nobody wants to shut things down. I don't think there's any appetite to do that. But if guys are getting it and they're having to sit out, that's how it has to be. And to me, I look at this as so frustrating because, the NHL was so proactive in getting guys vaccinated and making sure that they were basically 99.9% vaccinated, Tyler Bertuzzi excluded. But this was something that they were very much on top of. But, with how it works, it's not necessarily, it's not a 2-shot series anymore. It's 3. And, I think everybody's starting to figure that out very quickly. Now that they're coming down with it. Now, the upside is that they don't, it's not as bad, being vaccinated. Like, the symptoms aren't as harsh in most cases, but we still don't know how this thing plays out in the long-term effects, because it does a number on everybody's body that gets this, in one way or another. It's down the road. I do worry about that, but you have to worry about things at the present time. And for the NHL, this is about as bad can get, because they got so many things ahead of them, including the Olympics, All-Star game, all that stuff that they got to worry about.
Well, we'll talk about the booster shot in a second, but Kevin, a team like Carolina, who just has been hit by this, they had to call up some players today, and they're going to be playing with a roster too short of a full lineup to in their next game. And this is the reality. I know that Jeff Merrick and Elliot Friedman were talking on their radio show this morning about bringing back taxi squads, and about how the situation is that with everything spreading so quickly and the NHL not wanting to cancel games or postpone games, that might be the reality, that they have to have players on hand to replace at a moment's notice.
Yeah, well, really, I think the bigger issue is the salary cap as opposed to the availability of players. Because that's the issue. Joe's use of the words worry and frustration, I think, are really appropriate, because that's what I'm sensing. There's total frustration from the fact that they thought they were doing it all right, and it's still messy beyond belief in terms of trying to get players back. And like, no one is concerned that they're going to end up in a hospital. These are very healthy athletes in the prime of their lives, but there's a considerable worry among players about what they're going to bring it home to their families, to their guests at Christmas time, to the people they come in contact with, and it seems to be spreading really easily within the dressing room environment, which is not surprising, given we've been in enough dressing rooms to know that you can just tell by the smell that the germs there are everywhere. And it's complicated too, because and it's been more complicated by the fact, I think, that there's I don't want to call it overwhelming resistance, but there's some resistance to booster shots.
Yes.
And I think that's causing an issue as well, where you got everyone to do the vaccination, and now, because the vaccinations and people are still getting it, vaccinated people, you hear some complaining among some players that say, look, the vaccination really doesn't work anyway, so I'm not going to get another booster because I don't know what the impact's going to be. So I think it's really frustrating for all the teams. Nobody wants to cancel the season. And much to my surprise, it really has played some havoc now with the Olympics. I thought that the group was so fully committed. And I had talked to someone within USA Hockey just in the last 48 hours who told me that their sense was that only a couple of players were thinking about not going. But last night, 2 nights ago, Dylan Larkin said, it was yesterday. Yesterday, Dylan Larkin said that he has concerns about it now, and he's a leader on that team. Like, people listen to Dylan Larkin, so it is going to be interesting how people react. And and it's the same thing that we keep hearing with the Olympics, of just the unknown of the how long they'll have to quarantine if they test positive.
Well, listen to this tweet that the Islanders said a couple hours ago. This morning, head coach Barry Trotz said the entire team had gotten the COVID-19 booster shot. That statement is not true. The organization has offered the booster shot to the entire team and will continue to educate and recommend that everybody consider receiving it. So there's a problem there with the Islanders now, because the coach said...
Yeah, that was a mixed message.
Yeah. The coach and the organization are on different wavelengths there.
It could be that Barry Trotz misunderstood what...
Yeah, I mean, that I don't think there's anything sinister there. I think Barry just...
it's sinister, but I think...
Barry didn't.
Well, we learned two things. Even if Trotz made just an ordinary error, we now know that not everybody in the Islanders has a booster shot.
Yeah, and what you said, Kevin...
Well, there's no team in the NHL that has 100% booster shots before we're going forward. Okay, go ahead.
And what you said, Kevin, is right on. It's like, okay, all these guys got the 1 shot or the 2 shot, either Moderna, Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, AstraZeneca, whatever. And now players who are fully vaccinated are getting breakthrough cases, and their mindset is, okay, I did what you asked me to do. I got vaccinated, and we still got it. Screw you, I'm not doing this anymore. Now, that might be just the mentality of like, okay, you need, they don't want to conform. And I saw, who was it, Russ, Nick Cousins, was basically like putting up his hands and saying, maybe we should pause the league. Believe me, the last thing the NHL wants to do right now is pause games, because they don't.
That's where somebody needs to step up in the locker room and say, okay, you can't have it both ways. Do you want to continue to play and get paid? Then maybe you should take the booster shot. Even if you're not fully in line with it, the rest of us are, get it. And this is really a problem. The fact that I didn't know that teams weren't 100% with the booster shot, that's not good. They really, at this point, they could lose part of the season or have games played late into the season and have it get worse by not doing that. Like, it's a simple thing to do. It really is.
Well, right now, Kevin, I know that I think with the game that was just canceled, they extended Calgary's pause Saturday's game. I think that was what brought it up to double digits in terms of postponed games. I was telling Anthony and Russ this yesterday. If the players insist on going to the Olympics, and that's their right, that was what they negotiated in the seat with the CBA. What is to stop the NHL from saying, okay, you're going to the Olympics, fine. We got to make up these games during the 3-week pause. We're going to make up those games. And if you're if you're Washington and you're without Ovechkin and Backstrom and Carlson and 3 or 4 other players, that's just too bad. You could be without those players if they were COVID positive. So we need to make up these games. So we're going to make them up.
I don't think that would be allowed under the CBA, but I'm not positive of that. You could be right.
Yeah, maybe not. And I just think,
here's another thing, Mike, common sense wise. So now I guess you're trying to tell me, since this is something that I didn't realize because until the Islander tweet, so there are players that don't have booster shots that are still willing to go to Beijing without having a booster. Like, to me, that's crazy.
Well,
I wouldn't even consider it.
I don't, we just don't know how many there are. I just know
there are players. And the point is, there's probably some that are willing to go to Beijing and not get the booster. And I don't understand.
Well, I don't know. Would that be allowed? I don't know what the rules are. You got to be vaccinated. Yeah. So you may have to do that if you're going over there.
It's all the determination of what they consider vaccinated. And if it's shots, 1 shot or 3 shots is considered vaccinated, then we don't know. I mean, Joe, the funny thing is that we saw John Tavares came out, I think it was 3 or 4 days ago, and said he had some reservations about going, and he started to get criticized on social media because, we don't need John Tavares. Then Connor McDavid, then Alex Pietrangelo came out, and there was nary a criticism because I think all these players, maybe they're willing to go because of the opportunity to win, national pride and win a gold, but there has to be, if you have a young family like Pietrangelo, I think he has 3 kids under 3 years old. I think that, it's a legitimate concern to not go or to risk going and being over in China for 5 weeks if you test positive.
Yeah, that to me, the Chinese law is the thing that would make me pause instantaneously about going over, because you can't control whether you get it or not. I mean, the best you can do is get as vaccinated as you can and then hope for the best, because if you still end up testing positive, then you're stuck. And I read up, I forget who wrote about it. Maybe it was Elliot who wrote up about it. But what you have to do to get quarantined there is, it's very tight. Yeah. And there's no leeway. Like, you're not messing with the Chinese government, like you're not going to get a sweetheart deal from them. Like, that's not going to fly. So if I'm a player, especially with family, like Olympic time is, that's a long break, especially with the All-Star break just ahead of it. Like, that's a long time it's a short time in a long season where you can see your family, spend some quality time with the family. And then if you're getting bounced out of your lineup and having to stay in China for an extra 2, 3, 4, 5 weeks, no way, man. Like, never mind your duty to your team, but like, duty to your family. Like, that everything about that would make me say, you know what, let's see in 4 years, maybe we can get back to it there.
Well, this is how quickly things are changing right now. Yesterday, the Ontario provincial government made a statement saying that all gatherings of over 1,000 people, which would include Leafs games, Senators games, Raptors games, would be 50% capacity. According to Bruce Garriock, the MLSNE and the Senators were given 10 minutes notice before a conference call that the Ontario government held. and had to release a statement right away. And now they're scrambling to determine how they're going to tell their season ticket holders which ones will get to go to games and which ones will not.
It's bad there, Mike. I was on a call with somebody today who's in Ontario, and he said they're going to set a record for cases today.
Like, they're doubling every day in Ontario.
Yeah. So. And a guy on Twitter who is well connected with the media circles, who's YYZ Sports Media. He usually gets everything right. He's pretty good, pretty dead on. He tweeted, he says, rumblings this morning that if more teams have to reduce attendance like those in Ontario, the $1 million planned bump in next year's salary cap is absolutely in jeopardy. So, that would have to also go with, I think the projection was that there would be a big jump in the cap going, I think, in 23-24 or 24-25. If revenue, as they're planning it out right now, their projection was $5 billion. If that's cut significantly, then the cap freeze basically is going to extend further than just a couple years. So in the end, I think that's the motivation here. The bottom line here is they need to make money. They're going to keep playing games
for as long as they can. I mean, there's no way of saying, Mike, that they're not going to stop the season at some point. There's no way of saying that right now.
No. Although, the fact that they're playing the Detroit-Carolina game is proof positive that they're going to do everything in their power to try to play.
Now, I will say this, Kev. This is the one I don't get. Asking Boston to cross the border, I think there should be some of those games postponed right now until later in the season when it's a little better of a situation, because why would you have a team that's already compromised try and cross the border to play a game in Canada? Like, that seems like it's a bridge too far.
It is complicated, though. I mean, I just sort of yesterday got my arms around. I thought it was an error to let Detroit and Carolina play, considering Detroit just added 2 yesterday onto the COVID list. And, Carolina, of course, had 6. And Jeff Blashill sort of tried to explain it to everyone, saying that, he says, I don't know, all the details about their COVID diagnosis.
Right.
And so he said, that's what you don't know. Like, all we look at is the number of players, but where are they in the process? And they do have medical consultants that look at every situation. So these, he didn't say this, but he was implying is, most of us want to look and say, okay, Ottawa had 9, somebody had 7, so they had 6. So why aren't they canceling the game? But it really doesn't have anything to do with that. It's where they are in the process. And the fact that he thought, for example, that the fact that they had no positives, Carolina, yesterday, which sort of indicates that maybe there's a ceasing, a halting of the spread, is probably why they were allowed to play. But as he was explaining all that, I mean, it just struck how totally complicated this is, trying to sort it all out.
Kev, I mean, we saw Tucker Pullman with Vancouver, Morgan Frost for Philadelphia get pulled in the middle of games, which to my mind calls into question the testing process. They should have results on these guys.
No. Well, see, to me, it depends on what your politics are on that. Some teams, have basically line jumped and cut a deal to get their results quicker, while some teams are just in the mix with the rest of us. You were indicating that you think it would be better if they line jumped, and some teams aren't doing that.
Let me ask you this, Kev. Do you think the IIHF has line jumped? Because how in the world are players going to get 2 negative tests in a 24-hour period to go from the All-Star game to the Olympics and just to get to the Olympics in general? Do you feel like
they'll have their own system there? I'm sure.
They're gonna have to test when they get off the plane in Vegas, and then test before they get on the plane to Beijing. So I mean, it's.
I mean, you could really create your own testing if you wanted to. You could just set it up, and
it's the cost. That's the, and the problem in Canada is apparently I don't know whether it's government run or, if I know that they, because just regular people in Ontario, like reporters that I know who are having to pay $120 to $200 Canadian to get a test, to get on a plane to travel and cover games. That probably is the case for these teams, and that's a cost when you're testing every day or every other day.
Well, let me set this up for our listeners who sort of understand the kind of what I'm talking about here. In the real world, in real life, my grandkids go to school, and multiple times my kids and grandkids have had to quarantine because someone has tested positive. Right. Now, what ends up happening is my grandkids then have to be tested, and some member of our family, and it's been me a couple of times, have had to go in and be the quarantine buddies. But when we get our COVID tests, it takes 36 hours or somewhere between 24 and 36 to get it. Now, that is really disruptive to my family because it requires us all to be masked and no one can go, near them and everything else. So, if I have to wait, 24 hours for a family does, should the NHL players be able to get these things, instantaneously? I mean, they're just playing a game. We're right. Trying to live our lives. So, it's not, there's some ethics here that, have to be considered as well. So, I guess my point is I don't begrudge teams that say, we're just going to take whatever the time is. Like, your business isn't any more important than anybody else's life.
Yeah. And Terry, who's based in Ontario, says the government is controlling the testing. And I do know, like, I've crossed the border going into Canada. And they, even though I was tested within 72 hours, they handed me another test to do on my way up to Toronto. And I won't bore everybody with that sojourn that I had to find where I had to drop off the test. But needless to say, it was sort of, you're over. It's a little bit of overkill when you have to test somebody who had just been tested in 2 days before. But if
you're there for a week or 10 days, you have to test 3 or 4 times.
Right. Right. Exactly. But
that's costly. That's expensive.
Just this note before we move on here, because we saw Bergeron and Marchand, who I think if Canada does go to Beijing, will be on the team. Drew Doughty has tested positive for COVID-19. So, now that's not to say, they can recover in a couple weeks, but question is, how long does the virus linger in their system, and will they clear and test negative by the time they have to go over there? It's only
it's a shell game, I think. I think the players would have backed out. I think most of them would have backed out already if they didn't negotiate this and make a big deal out of it to say it's up to us and not the league.
Yeah, Joe.
I think a lot of them would love for the league to have been able to say you're not going, and then everybody could just get mad at the league and the players are out of it. But now it's up to them, and I think they're going to take a very long time to consider this because of that implication, and that's what I think is going on.
Joe, I think that's right. I think they got their dander up. They negotiated this. They're going to go, if it's over hell and high water. Mm-hmm. But at a certain point, you would think that there's going to be a bleeding of discontent with the players, and I know that, like Elliot Friedman said, if 2 or 3 players, or if it's in the teens, then they'll go. If it's 40 or 50 players, they're not going.
Yeah, it's such a hard spot for the players because this is the one issue, one of the main issues they really battle the owners with when it comes to CBA negotiation, because they want the Olympics. They want to play in it. They want it more than most anything else, it seems. And the NHL's stand on this whole thing is, Gary Bettman's kind of stood back and said, "Hey, it's up to you guys. You wanted this, so you guys can make the choice for yourselves. This, if you leave it to us, what our decision's going to be. Right. But it's up to you guys. You got to figure it out, because if you say you don't want to go, we're all about it."
Yeah, well, there's another issue here too that hasn't been brought up, but I've talked about it with some people. Is some of the guys who are thinking about not going are borderline Olympians. Now, I mean, you're still a great player when you're a borderline Olympian. Sure. But there's a pool of 55 players. So if player 16 on your roster is thinking about not going, you just say, player 26 is ready to move in, so.
I do want to say this, Kev, because in the chat room, like Anthony's saying, name one athlete that's been hospitalized. I can name you a lot of athletes. It's just you don't know them because of other sports. Olympic swimmer Maddie Wilson, she was hospitalized. Jacksonville running back Raquel Armstead, he was hospitalized, 24 years old. There's plenty of athletes. Alex Stalock still has a heart problem. He can't play in the league.
Eduardo Rodriguez, the Red Sox pitcher, got cardiac
myocarditis.
Myocarditis. Thank you. I was drawing a blank.
But there's plenty of them.
Yeah, I mean,
more than you think.
He recovered, but there's no guarantee that you are going to recover. So it is something that could be debilitating. So, I mean, we'll be tracking this. Obviously, we'll be talking about this constantly. It's going to have an effect on every game, on every team
every night now. There's probably going to be a question about one or two games.
Yeah. So, Kev, I wanted to talk about the Islanders because you wrote about them for Hockey Buzz a couple days ago. And I think you wrote about them before they lost to the Red Wings.
That's right. Yeah, it was just before the game. I finished the article, and then they didn't look so good against the Red Wings.
And see that's the thing. I mean, I agreed with the premise of your article. Mathematically, they're still in it if they could turn things around, but I think you would start to see signs that they could turn it around, but with players starting to score, or players starting to play well, or players getting healthy. Like Ryan Pulak's not going to be back, I think, for another 3 weeks to a month. They're not really scoring. They're getting okay goaltending from Varlamov and Sorokin. I just don't know if they can turn it around in time to really get back in the race.
Well, there's a couple of things about that. First of all, I was surprised that mathematically they weren't as far out as I thought they were. When we had talked about it on a podcast, we were kicking around, that they had to go, like
700, 750.
Yeah. Where really it was in the 680s. I think it was 680 is what they had to do in order. But if you can't beat the Red Wings, you're not going to play 680 hockey. I mean, the Red Wings are an improved team, but if you're going to start a winning streak, you've got to start it in that game against the Red Wings, and they're unable to do that. And the real issue they've got going is their defense, which is their hallmark. I think that can be repaired and they can get that going, but their offense, I don't know whether they can repair that or not. I mean, they weren't a great offensive team last year.
No, I think the push from the blue line is hurting because Pulak's out, but it's also hurting just in puck movement. I also think there's no chance for the Islanders to get in the top 3 anymore. So now you're going to be in a pool of 6 teams at least to try and get 2 wild card spots. And I think that's when you look at it playing 680 hockey, that's where it becomes really difficult. And I don't know where they're going to get the offense from. And I don't think they could simply trade for it because I think by the time they do trade for it, it'll be too late.
Now, Joe, I look like an absolute friggin' genius because I picked the Islanders to come out of the East. So I'm stunned by this. I thought that we knew that the additions of Chara and Parise were supplementary, secondary guys. With injuries, those guys have had to play more. I'm a little shocked at this. I mean, what is your read on the Islanders situation?
I'm not entirely shocked because I looked at this roster. You look at the roster on paper, and I know this team is built and their system is meant to keep things tight, and everything's supposed to be low scoring. But all it takes is 1 or 2 things to go wrong, and that can all go sideways. And it's been 4, 5, or 6 things have gone wrong for the Islanders so far this year. Right? They take a swing with Parise and Chara. I get it. They had to get some cheap veteran options in there because they're tight to the cap. And, who knew Zdeno Chara was going to magically turn old like right away? I mean, I don't know how much of that was being covered up for in Boston.
But how many blinders do you need? You've got Johnston. You've got, it's like.
Well, that's the thing with the Islanders, though, is like their bottom 6, like their bottom 9 is almost like a bottom 6 because they they don't have a lot of juice to their lineup. And, they lose Eberle to Seattle in the expansion draft, and it was kind of like, what are you doing? And it's because they gave the contract to Palmieri, and Palmieri's had a rough year. So everything that they've wanted, that they thought was going to go right, is not going right in any way. And, it's tough. I mean, if any team can bounce back and get it turned around, it's a Trotz team, because they are getting good goaltending. Sorokin's look pretty good, but like he's getting hung out now.
Martin, like what are they going to do for you when you can't score? Right.
That's where they're at. And you look at Anders Lee's numbers. He's got only 8 goals. He doesn't have any assists. Oliver Wahlstrom's done. He's having a nice start to a season, but
he's actually done well. Yeah.
But Barzal's Barzal, so you get what you get from him. But the scoring totals are so low that it doesn't take much to jump up the list.
I think only Arizona is worse in scoring than they are.
Yeah, and their cap situation is it's so bad, and there's a lot of bad money on that team.
There's 2 indicators on that team that I think really sum up their struggles. Going into that Red Wing game, Josh Bailey had 14 shots on goal for the season, and four had come in the game before the Red Wings.
Wow.
He just can't get any shots. And Brock Nelson leads that team in goals, and he's missed 7 games.
Now, they have 51 goals. They're 31st in the league. Arizona's got 50, but the Islanders have played 4 less games, so you would assume that they would score. But they're 13 goals behind 30th place Montreal. So that's how far behind they are. So, yeah, not good. Now, on the injury front, it appears, Russ, from the reports, that the Rangers may have dodged a bullet again with a key player, Shesterkin. It looked like he was seriously injured, and then he was only out, a week?
Like 7, yeah.
Yeah.
But he's not in there yet, is he?
I thought he
wasn't in there last night.
They played Keith Kincaid last night, so he's still out, but they're saying he's close to being back. But
it still could end up being like 7 to 10 games before he comes back. It just won't be like for most of the season like it looked like it was going to be. But
with playing 4 games a week, if you're out 2 weeks, it's 8 games. But Panarin got hurt last night, and they went over Arizona. But Gallant is saying it's a minor lower body injury. But based on what he said about Shesterkin, I mean, what's
the Rangers will always downplay it. So it probably is minor to the degree that, yes, he's not going to miss significant time. But again, Shesterkin has already missed enough time for the Rangers to go from really hot to starting to, back to playing like a little inconsistent. Like against Colorado, sure, it's a tough game. But they barely beat Arizona yesterday. Arizona gave them all they could handle and probably handed the game to the Rangers, to be honest. So, now you look, and I like Keith Kincaid, and I advocated for him to get in there simply because he was doing well in Hartford. But that there's an end game for that. And they're probably thinking, when is the right time to bring in Shesterkin? Because you don't want this injury to come back. That's the thing about goalies is with the repetitious injuries, that's where it gets a little, scary.
Now, Joe, there is no bigger cluster F in this league than the Buffalo Sabres goaltending situation. Craig Anderson, he was 41 years old. They signed him and Aaron Dell in the offseason. Anderson played well until he got hurt. Now, I don't know if he's ever going to come back. Aaron Dell has, I think, I have heard. I think you said that he came to camp not in the greatest of shape, and he has not played well for them. Tokarski has played a bunch of games. They trade for Malcolm Subban, and then last week they called up Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who I don't think they really wanted to call him up because I think they wanted him to get some experience down with Rochester because he's only played about like 40, 45 pro games in the ECHL and AHL. He plays great in I think 2 of the games, and now it's like, oh my God, we've got the savior. It's Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen. I mean, okay, we talked about this yesterday with Anthony on the show. If they keep him up, this is the same mistake that Philadelphia made with Carter Hart when he was not fully developed. And I don't think Luukkonen is fully developed right now. So what do you think the Sabres mindset is regarding Luukkonen.
No, I don't think he's going to stay up. I think he stays up as long as Tokarski is out. I think that's where the line is drawn. I'd be shocked if Aaron Dell plays another game in Buffalo. For one thing, that's gone as bad as bad can get with him. Like that's an incredible letdown. But in Luukkonen's case, he's played. It seems like a revelation because he's given them competent goaltending. Never mind that he's played well. It's just been extremely competent, as opposed to what we've seen from almost everybody else. But the need for games for him is so strong. He needs the minutes and he needs the games, and his AHL season's been pretty roller coaster. I mean, there's been a handful of games where he's just looked pretty bad. And Seth Appert, I mean, listen, he's sticking by his guy. He'll play him as much as possible. So that's which, hey, that's a good thing. And Appert knows goalies, so that's also a bonus. So they need him to keep playing, which, I mean, hey, if he plays again tonight, that's not a surprise. It certainly seems like he's going to.
But what if Tokarski is out for 3 weeks? They're going to play Luukkonen for the next 12 games. Like, they have other goalies.
Well, Subban is back healthy now. He's
yeah, but he hasn't played yet.
Well, no, but like he jammed his foot pretty bad against the post. I'm honestly surprised he's back as quickly as he is.
Yeah, it does seem like they're making convenient excuses to give Luukkonen time up there, maybe even for the head coach's benefit, so he could see what a team looks like with decent goaltending. But again, you do have to. He hasn't even played more than like 15 games in a season, Luukkonen, and that's really the worry, is the yo-yoing and the fact that he hasn't even had like a string of like 20 starts, anyway.
Well, again, that's not really his fault though. I mean, I think about his first pro season. They wanted him to play in Cincinnati as much as possible, and they had injury problems in Buffalo, which means guys from Rochester get bumped up, which means guys from Cincinnati have to go up. And that at the time, Jason Botterill and Randy Sexton had said that this was part of their plan. They wanted him to play games in Cincinnati and Rochester, but it was a little difficult to believe because of how things were just playing out,
right?
With injuries. So, but I mean, the COVID shortened season, he's comes back from double hip surgery after he leaves Sudbury, and last season was just all kinds of weird because he ended up being like a taxi squad guy, essentially, because they played about 8 goalies last year too. So this has been a never ending circus for them. And listen, Luukkonen provides them hope that the circus can stop at some point, which is what they're hoping to get out of him. But you're right. He needs to develop. He needs his minutes and he needs his games. Getting him at the NHL level and having him play great is fantastic. Right. But to have him be the guy the rest of the way this season, that's not the answer.
Yeah, because they're following that pattern with Quinn and with Krebs. They're still down in Rochester. Quinn is, I don't know if he's still leading the AHL in scoring, but he's probably still up there. Krebs started slow, has turned it around. It would not make sense to keep, have a slow development plan with them and to rush Luukkonen, especially in a year where there's nothing. They're not making the playoffs. I know they don't want to get killed, but they're not making the playoffs. So develop the guy properly, because 3-4 years down the line, if he's developed properly, he could be your franchise goaltender. So
there's also the part where they're stressing so much about development now with the Sabres, which that's been a buzzword for about 8 or 9 years, but they actually mean it this time, it seems. But if you're keeping Luukkonen up there because he gets hot, I don't know that it sends exactly the best message to guys like Quinn, especially, that he's played over the moon about how
he's going to be like, where's my bonus here?
Right. Exactly. So like that the guys that have been like steady, consistent, and great. Quinn's one of them. Krebs has stepped up now. Paterka's another guy who's played very well down there.
Good.
Yeah, he's been dynamite, and Matthias Samuelsson as well. Since he's come back, like he's been great as well. But they don't want to elevate these guys right away. They want them to play together. They want them to develop together, which that's what it should be. That's how it should be. But they're so over a barrel with the goaltending that they're forced to do with Luukkonen, and I mean, it's nice to have a guy that can step in and play well, But that's not the ideal situation they want for him. They want all those guys playing together so that when they do come up, and who knows, maybe they all come up together next season. Maybe that's the way it plays out. But they at least they're going to have that chemistry. They're going to have that winning under their belt. All the stuff that you want for developing a team, they're going to have it.
And it's
let me dump a little criticism on Kevin Adams on this though. I think you can make a case that Kevin Adams has been better than we thought he was going to be for a general manager who didn't have any experience. And I think even when he was hired, I think most people, I know my take was, and I wasn't alone in this, hey, look, maybe he's going to be a good general manager. Our criticism was it wasn't the right time to bring him in. This situation required a guy with some experience in dealing with all that. But I think his one failure is, and I look at it in comparison to the Red Wings, what Steve Yzerman said is we're going to develop our own goalie. We're going to develop this team. But while we're doing that, I'm going out and getting competent goaltending because I want my guys to be up here with a chance to win games now and then. Right. And that's what he's done. He brought in veteran guys. He had Bernier. He had Greiss. He kept Greiss this year. He went out and traded for Nedeljkovic because he wanted to make sure that when his young guys came up, at least they felt confident with what was going on behind.
And I saw him out scouting yesterday, Kev.
Well, now my point of all that is, shouldn't Kevin Adams have at least thought outside the box and said to his guys, get me the best free agent goalie out of Europe, the best AHL goalie, give me something different. Look, we're not going to be able to convince anybody here in the NHL to come and join us. We're a bad team. But I didn't see any extraordinary effort to go out to get a goalie.
They did not. They did not have a plan B after Ullmark went.
Right, that's what I was going to say.
They scrambled at the hours after and signed the first two guys they could get. In Dell and Anderson. I mean, everybody thought Anderson was going to retire.
Everybody knew Aaron. If you watch this show, I've been telling you Aaron Dell's done for 2 years, so it can't be a shock that he's played horrible this year. It's not a shock.
They had no plan. I think they threw money at Ullmark, thinking that Ullmark would, because I think they offered him more than what Boston offered him, and I don't know if it was 4 years. I think it was over the $5 million, Joe, or it was close to it. But
yeah, I think it was a 3-year offer, and I think Boston stepped up with 4, and that's what swung the deal. Also, the fact that Buffalo was going to be, if they're offering him 3 years,
right?
If I'm Ullmark, I'm saying like, well, when are we going to be good in those 3 years? Right. I've already been here for multiple seasons, and it's been awful. So, getting to see the good life in Boston is certainly more appealing, especially when you're getting 4 years to do it.
Yeah. I just want to talk about this because we've seen over the last few days video of Jack Eichel skating, and now there's been talk, Joe, about Eichel returning as soon as January, which is way, way ahead of the. Now, Russ asked a good question, Russ, regarding Eichel. It's like we were talking.
Yeah, my basic thing is, and I thought about it even a little further, Mike. Shouldn't they have like a crash test dummy that has the makeup of Jack Eichel and let Pacioretty kind of plaster it in the corner a few times before they let Jack Eichel take the ice and actually take contact from guys in the league? Because being an MMA guy is way different than being an everyday NHL guy. It's different on your body. It's a lot. MMA guys work out every day, but they're not in matches every day. Jack Eichel will essentially be doing this every day, have guys going after him every game, and we don't know how this neck is going to hold up. So I'm kind of wondering, how are they going to guess when that's ready for that kind of contact? Because there is no drawing board for that. Nobody knows.
And is all this, he's going to be back in January, all tied to, he wants to go to Beijing, which may not, I'm wondering if the NHL says we're not going to the Olympics, or the players say they're not going to the Olympics, all of a sudden Eichel's timetable changes until February or March.
Yeah, Jack's he wants the Olympics so bad. He wants to go so bad, and that was a big reason why the frustration with how long it took for the trade to happen was there, because he's like, guys, trade me so I can get the surgery done, so I can get back for the Olympics. But like this time frame right now, because he was operating on what 3 days after he was traded, it seemed like 3 or 4 days. So that was like what, second week in November?
Yeah,
I want to say
it was around Veterans Day that he had the surgery, I think.
Yeah, so I think we're getting, I think in that time around January is around the pretty close to the time when you start thinking like, you could be ready now. But I mean, if you're doing it, after at the end of January, then it's kind of like, all right, like what's the plan here? What are you doing? But if I'm Vegas, I'm nervous. I'm really nervous about that. But if he can go, and he, if he can get some of those full contact practices and then get a feel for it, I mean, hey, good for him. I mean, there's nobody who's more fit and stronger than Eichel out there. There's very few. He's just an absolute specimen, and the fact that he's busting his hump as hard as he is, I mean, he's got a lot to prove. I mean, I don't know what else he's got to prove, but he's certainly got a chip on his shoulder to show Buffalo, what's what. But if I'm Vegas, I'm nervous that if he's pushing it too hard, but I got a feeling that they got.
I mean, necks
right
are tricky
people.
though, Joe. I mean, him being in great shape has nothing to do with his neck, really.
Yeah, and it's a freak thing, but I mean, it's a freak thing for everybody out there. Like something stupid could happen in any game, and that could be it. So, I get it. Like, I totally get it, but I get Jack he's probably been gnawing at it to get back playing again for months now. Yeah,
and Vegas, I have to give them a lot of credit. They've been able to weather the storm. They got Pacioretty and Stone back. Stevenson has played really well between them.
It's like a point a game.
Yeah, I know. I couldn't believe his points.
I think that's been one of the biggest stories in the league. Yeah. We all sort of point out to Chandler Stevenson as look who they've got to play at center. I just saw a story on Hockey Now, Vegas Hockey Now, and the headline was essentially, that Chandler Stevenson said he's not conceding number one center to Jack Eichel. and I love that. I absolutely love that. And, in the back of his mind, he's thinking, well, yeah, he's going to come in here and I'm going to be number two. But you got to love the spirit of someone who said,
and to be honest, it may not be best to put Eichel number one anyhow for a while. It may be better to kind of leave it alone.
Yeah, like he's my new favorite player after reading that. I just think that's great. He's played great.
Let him play with Marchessault and Riley Smith for a while. But now, okay, Kev, you know that I always hesitate to toot my own horn, but right now in the Western Conference, in 8th place, 1 point ahead of the Winnipeg Jets, are the Edmonton Oilers. 16-11. They've lost 6 games in a row. I watched them play Toronto on Tuesday. I was thoroughly unimpressed. McDavid and Draisaitl, if a team, and it's easier said than done, if a team can limit them, and they were limited to 5 shots on goal in that game, there is no plan B after McDavid and Draisaitl. Now, you can say on most nights a team doesn't need a plan B because they're 2 of the best players in the league, and I wholeheartedly agree. But their defense is substandard, at least right now it is, and their goaltending without Mike Smith, with Koskinen and Stuart Skinner, is abysmal.
Let me give you one statistic.
Okay.
There, and I hope I'm right on this, but I think I am. The 5-on-5 save percentage of the Edmonton Oilers is .917. The 5-on-5 save percentage of the Buffalo Sabres, a team we just talked about how awful their goaltending, is .917. They're just not performing at 5-on-5. The goaltending.
The other problem might be with them, Kev. And look, and I picked Winnipeg out of the playoffs, so I'm not shocked. I think they've tuned out Maurice. I think Maurice will get fired after the season. Tippett is also a lame duck coach. He doesn't have an extension. You kind of wonder after a while, and they're not going to have a replacement for him, so I'm sure he's finishing out the season. But it's never a good idea to let a guy finish out the season and not have given him extension. I shouldn't say never, but it doesn't usually work out well.
How is what I don't get about? I mean, we should get it by now. Is that their whole plan has just been like McDavid take over, and then Draisaitl it blows up, and it's like, okay, we got 2 guys,
right?
And they have never filled in the ranks behind them.
Yeah, they're in year 7 of Connor McDavid. Like,
and Joe, Zach Hyman is an excellent player. It was a really good signing, but again, you made this roster. You re-signed Nugent Hopkins. You signed Hyman. You made their roster more top heavy. They could have the worst third and fourth lines in hockey. Right now with injuries on defense, they're playing guys I've never heard of. Now they do have, Evan Bouchard is a good young defenseman. Broberg may be in the NHL by next year or the year after that. So they have some players coming, but I'm baffled by Ken. I know that Ken Holland finished second in the bidding for Markstrom. He finished second in the bidding. I think he was in on Grubauer. At a certain point, you just got to say, I got to get myself a goaltender, and they still haven't.
Yeah, they've had so many, but it's not a matter of just like fixing one thing with them.
Yeah, it's multiple.
It's always multiple little fires, and then sometimes one of those fires is a lot bigger than the others. Goaltending's been an issue for them forever. Listen, they got faked out pretty hard by Mike Smith having a really solid year last year. I mean, I'll not take that away from them, but the fact that they kind of, I don't know how much they kicked the tires around in free agency, but they were very okay with keeping Smith around.
Which is never a good idea with a goalie with that much age. Like we did, it was a talking point for a lot of us, for sure. I mean,
and Smith's injury history on top of that
could be hurt now. Imagine if Zach Hyman's out for a month.
Yeah. So I mean, but they've had no depth forever. Their draft history is so eerily similar to the Sabres, where they cash in on the first round picks and they get nothing out of the next 6 rounds. Right. But they don't have anything behind them to help out. I mean, they should be excited about Evan Bouchard, but it feels like we've been waiting on him for a while.
No, he's playing well. He's playing well.
So we'll see what happens with this, but like, just putting it all on McDavid is just it's too much. Yeah. And I wonder at what point Connor's gonna look at what Jack did and say, like, you know what, maybe the guy had the right idea.
Yep.
Yeah, and finally, Kev, the biggest surprise in the league continues to be the Anaheim Ducks. 39 points, tied for top spot in the Western Conference with Minnesota. They're the older players like Shattenkirk and Getzlaf until he got hurt are playing well, but it's the kids. It's Terry, it's Zegras, it's Drysdale. I mean, I thought this would end. I thought this would this is a flash, and by the 35 game mark or 40 game mark, they'd be back like in the bottom part of the Pacific Division. They're on the top of the Pacific Division.
Yeah, and it's really a endorsement too for learning on the job. Like Zegras and Drysdale didn't roar out of the gate. There was some bumpiness there at the start of that, but the Ducks stuck with them, and they've been rewarded by that. But you're also right on when you say guys like Shattenkirk and Getzlaf was the biggest surprise of all. Yes. I think. I mean, honestly, he was so good. And sometimes older players, I've seen it in my career, they get rejuvenated by having young lions around. Zegras is funny. We've heard the story of him and Ryan O'Reilly. He's got a sense of humor. And I'm sure Getzlaf was amused by all that. Yeah. So,
one other guy that I want to mention from that team too is Anthony Stolarz, because when the Flyers drafted him, he had a lot of talent. He came out of the North American Hockey League. I had seen the guy. I was like, you know what? This guy's big, he's physical, and he knows how to play in net. Then he had a lot of injuries. Right. And I give Anaheim credit for sticking with him because he hasn't played a lot of games. Right. He really hasn't, but he's been impactful as a backup for Gibson, who doesn't need a backup that needs to play a lot of games. Like, that's the reality, is they play Gibson a little bit more than most goalies would play now as a starter. And right now, that's working for him. That tandem's been really, really good.
And they got three guys who are making salary drives in Raquel Lindholm and one other defense. Oh, Josh Manson. So
that's a problem for next year, though.
Well, no, but I'm saying that I think they're playing basically a new contract, and that's always a good motivator. But Joe, I heard something today regarding Eichel and regarding Anaheim that Elliott mentioned, because they were talking about the Eichel trade, and they said that Anaheim was in it to the very end, but Anaheim had an issue with the disc replacement surgery, so that in the end took him out. But also what took him out was what Buffalo was asking for Eichel. They asked for, and this is obviously before they started playing like this. They asked for Zegras, Drysdale, and 2 number 1s.
I listen. You don't get into a negotiation and start at the middle of the road.
No.
Like you don't do that. I mean, sure, yeah. If I'm the Ducks GM, I hang up the phone and say, like, be a little bit more realistic and call me back.
Yeah.
But
still,
it's juicy. But
Eichel's the number 2 pick in the draft, and I
top 10.
I don't
years ago.
Like, you didn't have to. It's not that much of a reach that both of these guys are turning into great players.
No, really but I don't think that's an unreasonable starting point. I'm with Joe.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, no. Plus, I mean, people are forgetting Eichel was 8th in MVP voting 2 years ago.
Sure,
he was friggin' great with that team, and the team was bad. But Eichel carried them on his back the whole year.
Back to that, but I'm gonna need to see proof and need to see it with my own eyes.
Yeah, if Eichel's
not anything about him or his ability or his willingness, it's just about, hey, can he overcome this? That's all.
Right.
If Eichel's back to 100% and you put him as a 1-2. A number 1 or number 2 center on Vegas, I mean, there are no limits. I mean, they've made conference finals without him, and if he's healthy and anywhere close to what he's been with the Sabres, then they're in excellent shape. But
by the way, Mike, just one more thing on the Ducks. Can we give an attaboy to Dallas Aikens coaching?
Yeah.
Because
I will, because I've been critical of him in the past. So
I mean, he did so great in San Diego after getting kind of burned out with the NHL, and then now he's showing up here with the Ducks, and they're doing great under him. I'm psyched for him. I mean, we all kid around with the veggie platters and whatnot, but I don't know, man. Guy can coach.
Yeah, no, he did a great job with the Marlies. It did not work in Edmonton, and now with Anaheim. And I think his contract is up at the end of the year, so they're doing well at the exact right time for Dallas Aikens. So yeah, I agree. All right, great show, guys. We'll be back tomorrow with another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast. For Joe Yerdon, for Kevin Allen, for Russ Cohen, I'm Michael Agello. Thank you for watching, and remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.